G'day and welcome back to MCS. If you're looking to purchase a road bike, one of the dilemmas or questions you might be facing is whether or not you should opt for a lightweight climbing bike or an endurance or gran fondo bike. Well, take a seat because in this video I'll cover off all the major similarities and importantly the differences between these two classes of road bikes and hopefully help steer you in the right direction. As you've probably already gathered, the lightweight climbing bike or race bike is the aggressive, race-oriented machine. So this sort of bike is optimized for responsive handling, crit racing and generally going very, very fast. On the other hand, the endurance or gran fondo bike is designed with comfort in mind. That makes the endurance bike perfect for those big days in the saddle or just floating over the rough stuff. Before we get stuck into the main differences between these two classes of road bikes, let's quickly go through the similarities across both bikes so that way you can eliminate these points when you're making your decision. These days, you will find very similar gearing across both classes of bikes. Up front, both will include either a semi-compact or compact chain set, and out the back, a wide ratio 1128 or 1130 cassette. It looks like disc brakes have gone mainstream and are here to stay on road bikes. So these days, both the traditional lightweight climbing bike and the endurance bike will both generally be available and come fitted with disc brakes as standard. Now let's cover off the main differences between these two classes of bike. Generally, the endurance road bike will accept wider tyres. This will improve the comfort as well as making them great for some light gravel work. However, with the modern trend for ever increasingly wider tyres, you'll find that the traditional lightweight climbing bike these days will still support a 28C tyre. But if you're really looking for the super duper wide stuff, you're better off with the endurance bike. In this table, we can compare the geometries of both bikes. I've chosen for the lightweight climbing bike, the Trek Emonda, and for the endurance bike, the Trek Damani. Both bikes are in a size 54. Straight up, we can see that the reach and stack are significantly different here. Now remember, the reach is the horizontal distance to the bars, and the stack is the height of the bars. So we can see that the lightweight climbing bike has a longer reach to the bars and a lower drop as well for that low aggressive riding position. On the other hand, the endurance bike has a much shorter reach and much higher stack. This will put you in a slightly more upright riding position and put less strain on your back, arms and neck. Whilst we're on the topic of reach and stack, it's worth pointing out that both these measurements can be altered in a couple of ways, either through the spaces under the stem or the length or angle of your stem. As an example, my Bianchi is my endurance bike and my TCR is my lightweight climbing bike. Now by playing around by slamming the stem on my Bianchi and including a few spaces under the stem of my TCR, I've actually got both bikes having exactly the same reach and stack as well. So the handlebars are in the same position across both bikes. You can also tweak the reach and stack with the size of the bike. So generally speaking, a larger size bike will provide a more relaxed geometry. Now, I'm not suggesting that you buy a bike that's not the right size for you, but if you're in between sizes, it's something to consider. If you go for the smaller option, you will get a much more aggressive riding bike in both classes of bike. So if we're able to alter or tweak the reach and the stack, what is the big deal? If we look at the other measurements within the geometry table, we can see that there are a few other measurements which are quite different as well, and these cannot be altered. We can see that the head angle is quite different by a good 2 degrees. Also, the trail differs by quite a few millimeters as well. The greater the head angle, or the steeper the steerer tube, the more responsive and more aggressive the turn-in on the bike will be. Similarly, the more shallow the angle on the head tube and the more trail a bike has, the more it will tend to be stable and want to go along in a straight line. Just think of the front fork on an American chopper. Those things are great for cruising in a straight line down the highway, but they're not so good around the turns. Now, these bikes the differences aren't that extreme, but I think you get the idea. Also, the chainstay is generally a little bit longer on the endurance bike and similarly the wheelbase is also longer on the endurance bike. All of these subtle differences in the geometry of the bike affect both the handling and comfort. So now let's look at that in a little bit more detail. With these subtle differences in head angle, trail and wheelbase, the endurance bike provides a much more stable ride. Conversely, the lightweight climbing bike with its steeper head tube, shorter chain stays, shorter wheelbase will provide a much more responsive and agile riding experience. For example, my Bianchi, my endurance bike, I could very easily, very quickly ride that with my hands off the bars. Whereas my TCR, it took me a little bit longer before I was able to achieve the same feat. The reason is it's much more twitchy and much more responsive to rider inputs. Now that's great if you're a bit of a Valentino Rossi, but or you're racing, crit racing, and you need to racing wheel to wheel around corners, or you like railing it downhill on steep mountain descents. But otherwise, you'll find the endurance road bike will just provide that much more docile riding experience. Another handling difference in these two bikes is the way they respond to power. The lightweight climbing bike, when you push on the pedals, it will tend to spring and really launch forward. Whereas the endurance bike with its slightly longer chain stays and perhaps a slightly less stiff frame, more focused on comfort, it doesn't quite accelerate as much under power. The endurance road bike will provide a much more comfortable ride. This is achieved in a couple of ways. Firstly, it's just by the inherent nature of the geometry of the bike. As we saw, the lightweight climbing bike has a longer head tube and a shorter wheelbase. So that means it's got more of this sort of a shape. Whereas the endurance bike has got a wider wheelbase and a shorter reach. So the triangles are shaped much more like this. So you can imagine that is inherently going to give you a much more comfortable, much more springy ride. Secondly, we can look at the actual carbon layup of the frames as well. So the lightweight climbing bike is optimized for stiffness, and as much as they will try to make it laterally stiff and vertically compliant and all this sort of jargon you may have heard, they are optimized for stiff, efficient power transfer. And as much as they might like to make them comfortable, that's not what they're about. Whereas the endurance bike, aside from the geometry, they will also include some other features as well to improve the comfort of the bike. For example, the Trek Domane has the front and rear ISO speed decoupler, and the Specialized Roubaix has their Pave seat post, as well as the Future Shock up front. Add in some extra wide tyres and the modern endurance road bike is ready to hit the rough stuff on the most epic of cycling adventures. As the names would suggest, the lightweight climbing bike will be lighter dollar for dollar than the endurance bike. So this will make a difference if you like hitting the hills. Now, of course, if you are willing to spend a fair bit of money, you can get a fairly light endurance road bike as well. But dollar for dollar, the lightweight climbing bike is the lighter option. So there you have it. I think that pretty much covers the main differences between the lightweight climbing bike and the endurance bike. What are my experiences of riding these bikes? Well, it's pretty simple really. I'm 42, I'm not really that young. There was a period on my lightweight climbing bike where the spaces were being moved from below the stem to above, but unfortunately I seem to have turned that corner and all those spaces, they're back under that stem. But what I find when I head out for a big ride in the morning, I'm fresh, I'm eager, and my lightweight climbing bike, she feels just the same. When I push hard on the pedals, she responds with the same sort of eagerness. I'm fresh, I'm fit, I'm eager, and I don't really feel any of the bumps and rough stuff on the road. A few hours down the track and I'm not feeling the same anymore. I don't really have that same push in the pedals, and I just tend to be holding a much more steady tempo. But unfortunately, my lightweight climbing bike, my Giant TCR, hasn't adjusted to the way I feel. It's still that super stiff, jarring, low aero machine that I started my journey on. So at this point, it starts to be fatiguing. So in terms of your fitness, the more comfortable bike will affect your endurance as well. If you're looking for maybe for racing, for short, sharp efforts, or you're very young and fit and flexible, then sure thing, go for the lightweight climbing bike. But if you're looking to, take it a bit more easy, spend a longer days in the saddle, maybe you're not quite as flexible as you used to be, give the endurance road bike a consideration. You can always, as I mentioned, slam the stem if you want and make it that little bit more aggressive, but overall they will be that little bit more comfortable, and you might find you enjoy your riding a little bit more. It's not all about racing and winning Strava segments. It's all about having fun and enjoying yourself. So anyway, I hope you found this video informative, and I hope it's perhaps help steer you in the right direction in making the purchase. If all else fails, just buy one of each. You can't go wrong that way. Anyway, comment below if you have any more questions or you'd like to share your own experiences, and thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video, and sure, thumbs down if you haven't, and stay tuned for the next one. I'll see you later.